There have been a lot of brilliant home-focused flat burr grinders coming out in the last few years, and they're getting better and cheaper, so it's time to ask, which one is the best? So I've gotten 5 of the most popular grinders, and I'm going to compare them across the following categories out of 5 stars. Some categories I'll rank in order from best to worst, and others I'll rank based on how good they are objectively, so more than one grinder can get a top or bottom score, and I'll count those up and give an average score at the end. Check the timestamps at the bottom for each section. So here are the grinders. In no particular order, there's the Matza Philos, the Varia VS6, the Turin DF83V, the Eureka Single Dose Pro, and the MHW3 Bomber F74 Navigator. All of these are decent grinders in their own right, and all in a relatively similar price and function range, and all designed for the enthusiast home espresso lover. Throughout the months of testing for this video, I used the Brew Ledger to keep track of all my settings and make more objective comparisons. It also helped me keep settings so whenever I changed coffee beans, or even grinders, I could get dialed back in no time at all. If you want to pick one up, there's a link in the description. First up, I'm going to grade the features, so that's all the things the grinder can do. Immediately out of the gate, the VS6, the DF83V, and the F74 Navigator have variable grinding speed. This is a big deal. This affects your grinds a lot, with lower speeds in general producing more similar sized grinds, so more clarity of flavor, and faster speeds generally sacrificing that clarity for body and texture. The Philos and the Eureka SCP don't have this. The top spot has to be taken by the DF83V for basically having it all. The magnet dosing cup, variable grind speed, anti-static, and augers with the biggest burrs on this test, 83 mils with diamond-like coating as standard. These are impressive feature sets for a grinder at this price range, so it gets the 5 stars. The Varia VS6 also gets 5 stars for having most of the same things except no auger, but I don't consider this a problem because of the housing shape. Not having an auger makes a lot of sense, though it's possible that pre-breaking has a small effect on particle size and shape. I don't think we have a way of measuring whether this is good or bad yet, so I'm not going to count it against this grinder. I'm going to give the MHW3 Bomber a 4 because while it has most of the same features as the DF83V, it's a stepped grinder, and the steps aren't quite as adjustable as the other grinders on this list, which loses it just 1 point. The Philos gets 4 stars too, because while there isn't variable grind speed, it does have this shot finisher, which basically gets you as close to zero retention as any grinder I've owned, which will be a category later in the video. But having this feature and the way it's integrated so you can use it to get just a little more out if you need to is really nice. The Eureka SDP also gets a 4 as it doesn't have variable grind speed, but it does have a dosing cup cover to reduce mess. Next up is workflow, which I consider to be one of the most important things in a grinder. You're using it a lot, and if there are small discomforts, then this can make it frustrating to use. There's a little overlap with design here, but I'll treat them as separate. My favorite in terms of workflow is the Matza Philos. I know it's not perfect, and some people really dislike the dial being on the back, but I personally really like it and find it very easy to adjust the grind setting because it has the biggest and most comfortable turning circle of any of the grinders on test. So picking exact grind sizes and replicating them is easy. The dosing cup system is the nicest for me too, almost no mess to clean up and just becomes invisible once you've got used to it for a bit. The dosing cup has a thin wall, so it's very easy to dose into a portafilter with just a narrow ring around the outside, so less distribution required afterwards. And the click of this cup back into the magnet holder feels so satisfying. Some would call this shot finisher a drawback in workflow, and for sure, having it behind the faceplate here is unfortunate, but honestly, I almost never need it, only when I'm switching to or from more expensive beans. It's also very satisfying to use too, and get even just the tiny bit of retention that's left in there out of the chute. The Philos gets 5 stars for workflow from me. The VS6 is mostly just as comfortable and fun to use, with the only big negative being the clicky chute. I don't like the pull down motion, this just doesn't work for me and tends to spray coffee grinds on the back a little bit, which on the white version shows up really easily. Adjusting the grind setting is easy and smooth, but I'm not a big fan of the numbering convention. Why 4.6 instead of 46? And the collar here moves the center with a magnet, which I'm not really sure is needed. But the grinder works really well, and honestly, the bellows is pretty much optional here since the burr chamber is so well designed. The magnet cup is also really nice with a thin ring just at the top, so it's easy and fast to dose, and grinds go directly into the cup with the only spraying being from the clicky knocker I mentioned earlier. grinder. So the VS6 gets 3 stars. The DF83V is up there with the Philos. Very easy workflow, super easy to adjust, and a cozy bottom for the magnetized cup. The only thing for me is that this little magnetized chute isn't ideal. It isn't as easy to clear out, and I tend to knock it off sometimes, which means it dropping into my dosing cup, which I then have to fish out. I get that it's supposed to help make it easier to clean out, but it doesn't really, and the DF64V actually had a much better version of this kind of magnet funnel design. Other than that, the workflow is super clean, and adjusting the face dial feels very smooth too. 4 stars for the DF83V. The F74 has a very similar workflow to the DF83V, a dosing cup that fits directly under the funnel so you don't make a mess, and it grinds super fast, so I really don't need to think about it that much, which is a sign of a good workflow design. The dial on the side for the RPM adjustment is also very similar, so the F74 gets a 4. The Eureka Single Dose Pro is a bit of a different workflow, and I think it's going to depend on the user whether they like it or not. I do like this cup screen that stops grinds from flying all over, especially when you use the bellows. However, this does slow down things a bit, as you need to attach it to the cup before you put it under the funnel, rather than it attaching to the funnel itself. It kind of creates an extra little piece you need to keep around, as you need to take it off when you're dosing as well. So I end up not using it all of the time just because it's a bit annoying to fit. But other than that, the workflow is simple, much like the others, so I'm giving a 4 to the SDP. Now, arguably the most important category, the flavor and burrs. So for this category, I'm going to rank the grinders according to a combination of the quality and flavor from the stock burrs on each one, but I'm also going to factor in the advanced options and grade them together and explain why I've given the scores that I have, because some of these grinders have the most fantastic burr options. To start off with, the Eureka Single Dose Pro stock 65mm burrs are decent, but their specialty black diamond burrs are probably my favorites on this list. I can't really understand why there even are stock burrs with this machine, when putting black diamonds in there by default would have made this a phenomenal purchase. And obviously, you can just buy the specialty burrs and upgrade them, but that raises the price significantly. And they are half blind, so there are no other burr carriers that make them for this grinder, and I haven't seen any other companies intending to, because for now, they'll only work on this one grinder. And funny they should call the burrs 65mm, because I measured them, and they're actually a hair under 64mm. I think 64mm burrs might even fit if it weren't for being half-blind discs. So I have to give them 4 stars out of 5, because if you have those black diamond specialty burrs, it will produce beautiful espressos, some of the best ever, but I'm taking them off the top spot because of the limited options in upgrading and the weird choice to have half-blind burrs. Now, when it comes to the Vario VS6, not only are the stock burrs very good in their own right, but this is the only grinder on the list that can be upgraded to have either flat or conical burrs, with different options to cater to your tastes. My favorites have been the Hypernova flat burrs. They're excellent for espresso. They taste really punchy and sweet, and the burrs are all blind, so no grinding blade surfaces are disrupted by screws. These burrs are the smallest in the group though, at 58mm. Bigger doesn't necessarily mean better, but it does change the grinds considerably, and many would argue that they can't really compete with 74 or 83mm burrs in grinding efficiency. When I spoke to the company director at past coffee shows, he mentioned that the size was chosen because it was the right size for the chamber they wanted to create to reduce regrinding and retention. More on that in the next section. So it is a little slower, bigger burrs means more cutting surfaces, so it isn't as fast as the other grinders on this list, but it does create excellent flavor, and the design of the burr chamber means that you'll never have any issues with alignment, which is a massive plus. Same as with the Eureka Single Dose Pro though, these burrs are custom for this grinder only, so they're quite expensive, and as far as I know, you can only get burrs from Vario. So overall, the VS6 gets 3 stars. The DF83V has the biggest burr set in the group at 83mm, and because of that, it's also the fastest. The stock burrs are fantastic, and because the size is more standardized than the previous 2 grinders, there are lots of inexpensive and advanced 83mm options from third parties, and I did end up putting some SSP high uniformity burrs in here, and they absolutely slap. They have steep breaking teeth from the center of the burr set, and as the grinds move out, the teeth go much narrower, so you get fewer fines than many other burr sets I've seen. So you get more balanced sweetness and perceived acidity in the cup, so you can go for maximum extraction without the worry that you'll get too much bitterness. If you're interested in how burr geometry affects flavor, I'll have a video out about that in the near future. I'm doing some deep research on physics to make sure I understand it all correctly, so make sure you're subscribed to see that when it comes out. Even with the stock burrs, you'll get fantastic coffee, and they'll last for ages because the stock burrs have that diamond-like carbon or DLC coating. Being larger, they also generate a lot less heat and static, so I found that I don't even need to RDT with this grinder and still get really nice fluffy grinds, even when on the maximum RPM of 1600, where it can grind out an 18 gram dose in like 6 seconds. The only negative is that you do really have to make sure to align perfectly, because the bigger the burrs, the more the difference in alignment messes with your grind size. Even just a few microns out at this size will cause a big problem, as it does with any other big burr grinder. But with such beautiful flavour and big burr energy, the DF83V gets the top spot, 5 stars. Next is the Matza Philos, and one of the things I really like here is that it has very low tolerances that align the burr set with the housing very nicely. I switched burrs several times and haven't had much issues realigning, though the screws were really wedged in there the first time and I had to fight to get them out. This one uses 64mm burrs, and of the 2 stock burrs Matza offers with it, I much prefer the espresso focused 189D burrs over the 200D multi-purpose ones. Really delicious flavour, optimised for traditional up to around a medium light roast espresso, and they've got the most advanced auger on this list, meaning that the beans are pre-crushed before leading into the grind chamber, and so grinds can exit more quickly, reducing clumping and regrinding by a lot. What's also great about the 64mm size is that it has the most burr options available, and I got these amazing Lab Sweet burrs by Brew recently, and the flavour is just outstanding. So I'm giving this grinder the 3 stars as well, because like the VS6, it has some great burr options available, but it isn't quite on the same level as the Turin's 83mm Beasts or Eureka's yummy light roast specialty focus burrs. And that leaves the F74 Navigator, which had the least exciting burrs on this list for me. They are titanium coated though, which is great, but they didn't have as much clarity as stock burrs from the other grinders, probably more optimized for traditional Italian espresso. There are some good options for 74mm burrs out there though, so you can definitely upgrade, but switching the burrs and opening up the housing was a bit of a pain, and it's hard to get everything set back in. As soon as you open up the front, all of the greased up internal parts like this spring at the back here get coffee grinds all over them, so you'll need to reapply grease regularly if you switch out the burrs often. Though I know most people don't do this as often as I do. So the F74 Navigator gets 2 stars for flavour and burrs. Now let's move on to retention. I'm just going to rank them according to how much retention they had in them after grinding 3 18 gram doses for espresso shots. I weighed it with the Varia 8KU Pro scale that can measure up to 0.01 of a gram increments. I hope it doesn't cheat in favour of the Varia grinder. There's no way they could program that, is there? The worst performer was the Eureka SDP, as I already tested for my review video, with 1.72 grams of retention. This was by far the most, and it seems like the reason is because of the high speed of the burrs, combined with too little space between the burrs and the housing, making it kind of create this ring of coffee around the outside of the burrs. So it gets 1 star. The next I'm going to give to 2 grinders, as they were both within a very small margin of error, the MHW3 Bomber and the Turin DF83V, with 0.64 grams and 0.68 grams respectively, so 3 stars for each of them. Then the Philos had just 0.49 of retention, and that's without bellows because it doesn't have them, and without using the shot finisher. This almost makes me want to go back and give it another point for workflow, because just grinding and clicking the knocker at the bottom, which incidentally is my favourite knocker design, gives you lower retention than most of the competition. But then along came the VS6 with a minuscule 0.35 grams of retention. To me, that's wild, to have basically nothing left in the grinder after making 3 espressos. I knew you would cheat. Next is size, and yes, size matters. I'm lucky that I've gotten pretty close to my dream coffee studio. I even made a video about building it, but that means that space isn't really a problem for me. But for a lot of people, their espresso setup might be in the kitchen or on a much smaller table, so I've just ranked these in order of how much space they take up in total volume, but also taking into account how tall, bulky, or inconvenient they might be. By far the largest in all aspects was the Matza Philos. By volume, it's 19.5 litres and takes up the biggest footprint of 537 cubic centimeters. So it's going to get the 1 for this category. It's a hefty grinder. If you've got the space, this isn't a big deal, but it is very large. The smallest one is the MHW3 Bomber F74 at just under 9 litres and a footprint on the countertop of 320 centimeters squared. Though these numbers are a little deceptive, because it's so thin, it's actually quite a bit longer than the 2 standing style grinders on this list, so I'm giving it the 3 spot for size. It could fit very easily in a narrow space, but if it's in a kitchen, it's going to come out much further onto the counter. Both the Varia VS6 and Eureka Single Dose Pro have a very small countertop footprint, 249 centimeters and 346 centimeters squared respectively, and since they aren't particularly deep, they feel quite easy to slot in at the back of a kitchen counter where the Philos and F74 just wouldn't comfortably go. So for that reason, the VS6 and the Eureka SDP are getting the 5 stars for being very versatile where they can fit and taking up very little counter space. The touring grinder is quite similar to the Philos. It's the second largest at 15.5 liters, just over 30 centimeters long, and takes up 346 centimeters squared of counter space. I guess it's still kind of impressive because despite having the biggest BURRS, it's still marginally smaller than the Philos, so I'll give it the 2 stars. Now the design category is very difficult to judge and includes quite a lot of things. I'm going on how thoughtful the layout and functions of the grinder are, and the materials and manufacturing expertise employed to manifest the vision of what the grinder function should be, and of course, the look. For me, the F74 Navigator is my least favorite in terms of design. I think they've done a lot to keep the price down, which we'll get points back for in the next section, but the look is simple and functional, and I don't really see much evidence here that they were made with lots of testing and thinking about how it would feel to use every day. I don't mind a brutalist design, sometimes they can be very charming, but to me the F74 just doesn't fit with most people's espresso setup. It looks a bit more like a mini gaming PC or something. If you like the sharp angles, tell me in the comments. It is also quite frustrating changing BURRS, as I mentioned before, where you have to kind of push everything in while you fiddle around with screws that are half falling out. Changing this back and forth to switch out BURRS is not fun. And the adjustment dial at the front is probably the least friendly of all these grinders. It's kind of stepped, but kind of stepless. It can move between steps, but it clicks on them, so you're never quite sure what exact setting you're on. Am I on step 5, or is 5.5 a discrete grind size? For that reason, the F74 gets 2 stars. Then on the other end of the scale, the Philos just looks gorgeous with the brushed steel, the perfect cylinder shape, the angled magnet cup, and clean visual design of the adjustment dial on the back. I know some people may disagree, but I think this grinder is just beautiful, and it's obvious to me that so much thought has been put into all the ways the design interacts with the user. The clickiness of the magnetized dosing cup is just so satisfying, and that's part of what design is. It's putting a smile on your face with the regular function of the device. Removing the front to get to the BURRS is easy and toolless with thumb screws, and only requires a Phillips head to remove the BURRS themselves. So because of all that's gone into it, the Philos gets my 5 stars for design. The VS6 also has that same obvious thoughtfulness in the design. I'm not as fond of the look, but it does look like it was built out of a solid block of aluminium in one piece, so no worries about the material or form here. Opening up the top and seeing the design of the grinder chamber, this truly is the best I've ever seen. Just the idea of mounting the BURRS in the housing of the machine instead of trying to align 2 opposite facing plates is an innovation that has not had anywhere near enough recognition. Burr alignment is the most common answer I give when people ask me why their coffees come out perfect one shot and then terrible the next without changing the grind size. It's maddening that some manufacturers don't bother doing any aligning and leave beginner home users with nerfed grinders even after they spent all that money on it. But for the VS6, it's never a problem, so it's getting those 5 stars too. The DF83V is a little closer to the F74 though. It feels quite functional, but it lacks the charm of the Philos or the VS6. It looks fine, I guess, nothing special, but it's really just the little things that make it feel a bit odd to me. One is the power rocker that I don't understand. Why are there 2 power buttons when this isn't necessary for any of the other grinders, and why red LEDs on this rubber rocker that just doesn't look very nice? And the RPM dial is on the other side down low, so it's not easy to see what you've set it to, whereas the F74 has the RPM and the power on button built into the same dial. They also made the choice to select an RPM all the way down to 300, but the motor doesn't really have enough torque at that speed, so perhaps it's better to slow feed if you're going to use 300, or just use 800 or above to avoid stalling. So the DF83V gets 2 stars. The Eureka is in an odd spot. I really like the look. It's much more traditional looking than the more modern style of the other grinders, but it fits quite well with my setup and I like the combo. I just don't think the bellows is ideal. It's a bit too big, and perhaps it's time for Eureka to ditch this housing design and figure out something new. The hopper is superfluous as it's called the Single Dose Pro, so just make the top smaller so you don't have to have this extra wide funky bellows. As I mentioned in my Eureka review, the main points the SDP is losing on is the weird choices in screws and the decision to only have half-blind burrs. This is obviously just because they wanted to get to market faster without having to redesign the whole housing from the ground up to accommodate screws on the back of the burr instead of through them. And having 14 screws and 4 different tools needed to change the burrs and clean out the chute that's just not on. So for that reason, the Eureka SDP loses the points it got for the nice look and gets 3 stars. Now let's compare the prices of these grinders. By far the most expensive one in the group is the Matza Philos, and that's if you buy it direct from them and then pay the import tax. In the US, it's probably going to be a bit more with those Italy tariffs. But the BURRS are standard size, so you can get third-party BURRS which tend to be a lot cheaper, or at least give you many more options what kind of BURRS you want to get. But even so, the Philos is an outlier on price for the machine, so it gets a 1 out of 5 for being the most expensive in the group. The next most expensive is the Turin DF83V, which is around £695 in the UK. In the US it's much more reasonable though, so I'm going to give this a 3 for price. The rest are all within £20 of each other. The Eureka Single Dose Pro at $549, the Varia VS6 at $561, and the MHW3 Bomber at $569. If you use my links and codes in the description, I've gotten you guys 15% off the Varia and MHW3 Bomber grinders though, but just to be fair to the retail prices, I'm going to give these 3 grinders 4 out of 5 for price. None of them are cheap, but for what you get, I think the performance is huge. So here are the final scores with my thoughts. Remember, these scores aren't measured on which grinder is just better, I'm just averaging out these scores on each section, so you have to take into account your own preferences too. I don't care about size because of my big coffee space, so the Philos being huge doesn't bother me, and if you just want the best performance for the price, you'll weigh things out differently than if you care about how it looks and the comfort of the workflow. So first up, the top spot by quite a big margin went to the Varia VS6 with an average of 4.43 stars. It's a great grinder, brilliantly designed, perfect alignment guaranteed, and the only real issue I have with it is that damn pull-down chute, and it looks like Fused Divisions is working on a little clasp of that, which turns it into an easy push-click instead of that weird pulling down motion. A well-deserved top spot. Second place goes to the Turin DF83V with 3.57 stars for being an incredibly feature-rich grinder at a reasonable price, and having the biggest BURRS of the lot definitely helps to get some really amazing flavor. Then in third, it's a tie between the rest. The Matza Philos, F74 Navigator, and the Eureka Single Dose Pro all got 3.29 stars on average. I have a soft spot in my heart for the Matza Philos, but it lost a lot of points for being huge and expensive. If you don't mind that, I love the feel of using it, and it's a phenomenal grinder. Similarly, the Single Dose Pro has some of the best BURRS I've played with, and it looks really classy on my bench. The Black Diamond specialty BURRS make light roasts even better, and it's only really let down by having higher than average retention and the internals not being as thoughtfully designed as the more modern styles of grinder. And the MHW3 Bomber F74 Navigator is a really great grinder and really overperforms in features for the price, but for me it just lacks the polished look and feel of the other grinders on this list. So this has been probably over a year of testing with all these grinders, and if you want me to continue being able to do long form, complex videos like this with over 3 grand of coffee equipment, the best way to support my channel is by picking up a copy of the Brew Ledger, the coffee journal I designed for you espresso lovers. Even if you only have one grinder, it'll help you get dialed in much more quickly because you'll be tracking what you're doing instead of just guessing. You can experiment more with different beans and always come back to perfectly dialed in shots. So let me know what you think of these grinders, if you own one or more of them, or if you disagree with any of my assessments. I'm happy to duke it out in the comments. And thank you so much for watching, you wonderfully overcaffeinated people, and I'll see you on the next one.